absurd for their eminence so to prevail as to pull down the loftiness of God. On the contrary, their eminence depends upon God's loftiness and ought to lead us to it. Those are strong words. When you read that, it kind of makes you fall back a little bit. You realize what Calvin is saying here? He's saying that if your parents tell you to do something that is sinful, then they are acting towards you as strangers, not as parents.
That's right.
And even though they are above you in terms of authority, you have to realize that their job is to lead you to God, not to lead you away from God. And if they try to lead you away from God, you can't let their failure be an excuse. You cannot sin against God. You have to follow God anyway. But if you think those are strong words, you ought to hear what this other preacher has to say. Do not think that I have come to bring peace to earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. I've come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a person's enemies will be those of his own household. Whoever loves father and mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Throughout all of history, in so many different societies throughout the world, following Jesus has meant rejecting your own family. Satan has a tremendous amount of influence in this world, and he has created religions and social systems that punish people for becoming Christians. And so people's own family members can end up rejecting them for associating themselves with Christ. And when they do that, they will think that they are doing a good thing. It is not uncommon for a Muslim man to hit his wife or hit his children for associating themselves with Jesus Christ. There are many ways in which we must suffer with respect to our family if we want to follow after Christ. If the choice comes up in your household between following Christ and following after parents, you must follow after Jesus Christ. And if they lead you away from the one true God, then they aren't acting like strangers towards you. Or they aren't acting like parents towards you, but they're acting like strangers. And if they try to make you do something that is morally wrong, you have to do what God says is right. Last week we were talking about one of the ladies in the church and how she had given Mandy and us some very good advice. She gave us good advice concerning the day of rest. Her husband said, I need you to stay at home. I need for you to take care of everything on Sunday morning because you have responsibilities here at the house. I need you home. I don't need you going off to the church. And what she did was this. She made every single thing absolutely perfect on Saturday night. She made sure the food was in place. She made sure that everything was clean. She made sure that everything was perfect. So there was no reason that he could complain come Sunday morning. And then she went to church anyway. Because she wanted to follow after God, not after men. There are going to be times in which you have to tell your parents and other authorities that you cannot do what they want you to do because you have to be obedient to God. You should be as respectful as possible when you do this. You should say something like, Sir, I can't do that because my God does not allow me to do that. But when it comes down to it, you must obey God and not men. But that's not the problem most of the time when you're talking about this commandment. Most of the time, the problem isn't that our parents or that some authority figure is asking us to do something that's sin. Most of the time, they're simply asking us to do something that we don't want to do. Well, remember this. Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. When your authority figure says to do something, you should do it. So those are the responsibilities of children. Let's talk about the responsibilities of parents. In the summer of 1996, there was a group of young elephants that were taken from Kruger National Park in South Africa, and they were moved off to another reserve. And this group of young elephants soon became little delinquent elephants. They became bad elephants. They started to rip up all the trees. They started to attack the tourist cars. They started threatening the rangers. They started to be a terror in this other reserve, to the point that the rangers had to go out and shoot them. That was the only way that they could keep the park safe, was to kill these young elephants. They had become so aggressive. And this is the reason. This is why the people in South Africa believed that the elephants had become this way. They said that the elephants had been taken away from their parents too early. Elephants are very social animals. They learn how to act from their parents. And human beings are far, far more social than elephants. We definitely learn how to act from our parents. And when the family starts to break down, then that affects the way that the kids act. And that affects all of society. The family is very important. In 1948, the United Nations Universal Declaration on Human Rights said this: "The family is the natural and fundamental group unit of society." So the United Nations is saying that the family is the thing that is most important. If you don't have the family right, then nothing else is going to go right. The most important thing in society is not the school, it's not the government. These are not the most important organizations. The family is. Because without the family, decency and morality and respect for authority cannot exist. Let's talk about authority within the context of the family, within the context of how parents should act towards their children. We live in a world where authority is very important. God has ordained that certain people be in authority over other people. God has ordained that government be an authority for the good of man. And you can see that in Romans chapter 13. God has ordained that there be bosses who are over servants. And you can see that in Ephesians chapter 6. God has ordained that there be church leaders who are in authority over the congregation. Hebrews chapter 13, verses 7 and 17. God has ordained that husbands be in authority over wives. Ephesians chapter 5, 22 and 24. These are aspects of society where authority is very important. But the first place that we learn about authority, the thing that prepares us for all of these other kinds of authority, is when we see authority in the home. We learn about authority as little children from our parents. And if we fail to learn it during childhood, then the rest of our lives is going to be difficult for us. You, as parents, need to teach your children to act respectfully towards you. You need to make sure that they treat you in a manner of respect. In your culture, that may mean using certain titles with you. It may, but the thing that is more important is the way in which it is like the attitude that they have towards you. If your parents aren't treating you if your children are not treating you with a respectful attitude, then you need to correct that behavior. You need to make sure that they do as they will be expected to do for the rest of their lives. You need to make sure that their obedience is the way it should be. You need to make sure that they obey the rules of the household. You need to make sure that they obey the Ten Commandments. And when I was thinking about this, I was thinking the most difficult part of this, at least for me, is just being consistent. Just making sure that the rules are obeyed all the time. It's easy to make your kids obey the rules part of the time. It's a whole lot more difficult to make them obey the rules all the time. There are times when you know that you need to punish them for something, but it's easier just to let it go. There are times in which you know that you need to enforce the rules, but it's just easier to give in. Last night, Sophia knew that there was bacon inside the refrigerator. We cooked a little bit too much bacon, and we put some bacon into a little container and put it in the fridge. And she knew it was in there. And so she was going around last night going, "I want a whole bacon! I want a whole bacon!" But she hadn't eaten all of her supper. And so we have this rule in the house. You can't have the bacon, or you can't have the candy or whatever it is you want until you finish off your supper, until you clean your plate. You can't have the whatever price it is you want. And she hadn't done that. But when you hear that whiny little voice, when you hear, "I want the bacon," you want to give in, don't you? Well, you should. Because you know that it's